So where we left off last time is we had created our two models, our house model and our associated student model, such that a student belongs to a house and a house has many students. And we were just starting to create the seed script, which is what I've got up here to create the houses and the students, but we ran out of time, and so we just had the houses created. So I'm going to add the students in, which is not going to add too much more complexity here, but we have this loop here for sort of at right now 5 times. We're creating 5 different houses, and down below that I can say something like number of students, and I can pick like a random number. So I can say like per house we're going to have somewhere between like 10 to 15 students. And then we can say like number of students dot times due. And we need a reference to the house that's being created. So I will add that here. And then because of the fact that we've set up our associations, that has many and belongs to, I can go to that house and go to its students. Even though the collection is initially empty, I can say, create me a new student. And in this case, it's just a student with a name. And I'm going to use Faker for that. And so it'll be Faker, movies, Harry Potter dot unique dot character. And that's the only property that I have on a student that isn't the foreign key. And the foreign key is going to be set up automatically because I'm going through a particular house to create that student. So the created student's house ID, which is the foreign key, will be assigned the house's primary key. So if this house has a primary key of 12, then the student that's being created here will have a house ID foreign key of 12. And so that's going to be populated automatically by way of the association. And then just to make sure things are working well here, I can say created student.count students. And that's just a quick smoke test to make sure that this entire script is working well. When we run it, it'll blow away all of the students to begin with. Then it'll get rid of all of the houses. We saw last time that the order of that was important. You can't destroy the houses first because then you'll be left with a bunch of students that are referencing houses that don't exist in their foreign keys, and Rails will actually prevent that from being a possibility. So we have to delete the students first, clear out any students associated with the house, and then destroy the houses. Okay, so I can try running the script, and we can see, we should get somewhere between like, at least 50 students, right? Because our minimum is 10 students per house. So back over on my command line, I can run a Rails db migrate and just run that. Nope, that's not what I want. I want a db seed. This will do nothing. I don't have any outstanding migrations. And then I'll run the proper command, which is Rails db seed. I could probably kill it with a control C. Yeah, there we are. db seed is what I actually wanted to do there. And we'll let that go through. It'll create our houses, and then for each house, it should now be creating 10 to 15 different students per house. And then we should see this coming out at the end. Created 5 houses. We've got 61 students. If we hop over to the Rails console that I have running, I can verify all that. There's my 5 houses. There's my 61 students. I can get a student. There's a particular student. They have house ID 12. I should be able to go to that student and find out the house that they're in, specifically the name of the house that they're in, Ravenclaw. And I can even chain from there to like how many students are in that particular house. Oops. I gotta go house.students. I'll use count. So there's 14 students in that particular house. So that shows to me that things are working correctly, right? I can also go grab a house. So I can say house equals house.last, for example. That's Gryffindor. How many students are in Gryffindor? Well, house.students will tell me. There's 12 of them. If I want to see what all those students are, I could go like that, and I can see all of my various students. So that's great. That means my seed script is getting us to a point where we now have enough sort of realistic data in the database to start building the web app portion of the app, where we can actually, load up a web page and, see all these houses, see the data related to the houses, like the number of points, maybe go to a page that's particular to one of the houses and see all the students that are in that house, have some links between those various pages, etc., etc. So I will just then commit the changes to get here. The C script is now adding students for each created house. And I can close that seed script down and the gem file down. And I probably don't need to reference these models for a while yet either, so I'll close those as well. So when we were planning this out at the beginning of last class, we had determined a few things about what we wanted from the web side of things, which is we're going to have 2 different routes that are going to route to 2 different controller actions, and they're both on the same controller. So we're going to create a houses controller. It's going to have an index action for retrieving and showing all houses, and it's going to have a show action for retrieving and showing a house by ID. The routes are going to be, if we just go to the root, right now the root of the application goes to the Rails welcome message. So we're going to remove this and replace it with this index that's going to show all the houses. And then for each one of those houses, we can drop a link to that particular house, where the link will be /houses/ this is just a placeholder here. This will be the primary key of the house we're linking to. And so that when the show action gets triggered, we can use the ID from the URL to load the house and then display it, and we could display like the students in that house. And then so for each of these actions, there's going to be a view associated with it where we have a mixture of HTML and ERB for looping through our data and echoing out stuff into the HTML. So just like I used a Rails generator to create the models for house and student, I'm going to use a Rails generator to create the houses controller, and then I'm going to manually create these routes. The views and even just placeholders for the actions are going to be generated when I create the controller. So here we are over here. Rails G for generate. I'm generating a controller. The convention is that there's typically a one-to-one mapping between models and controllers, and the controller tends to be the pluralized word for the model, which is usually the same name or is the same name as the database table. So this will be the houses controller. And then I've already identified the fact that I want 2 actions and 2 views. I could just hit enter here and it would create an empty controller for me. But because I already know that I want an index action and a show action, I can add those as extra arguments. And in the controller, it'll put in empty methods, and in the app views houses folder, it'll put in 2 views for me. So when I know that information up front, I might as well get Rails to do some of the work for me. And we can see there's the controller that was generated. It's in the app controllers folder. There's a new app view houses folder for all the views that are associated with the houses controller. We've got 2 views sitting in there. And so I can now save this to version control, generated a houses controller with an index and show action / view. And other stuff got created. So some of the stuff that we don't tend to touch in this course, like the sort of the stuff that has to do with testing, that is also being generated as well. So like a test controller is there. And there's a sort of also a file into which I can put CSS styling, and we'll see a little bit of that today, just a small example of some styling. We're going to open up some of those files now. We're going to open up in the app controllers folder. Going to open up the houses controller. We can see here it inherits from application controller, and that's just another file in the same folder. Anything we add to this file here, anything we put in the application controller class, is inherited by all of our controllers, and then we get a bunch of behavior that we inherit from action controller base. So there's my houses controller. I'm also going to open up in the app views folder both the index and the show view. And these views are only like the HTML associated with this particular action. The overarching HTML that goes with the pages that are being displayed, that's inside of this layouts folder. So I'm going to load up that application.html.erb. And then the very last thing that I want to load up is in the config folder, my routing file. And that is this routes.rb. Rails put 2 routes in there. We can try them out, even without having anything in the houses controllers actions. There's a little bit of stuff in both of the views. Each view just sort of says, you know, I am the index view and I am the show view, and it sort of shows what path they're in. So we can look at these routes, and then we're going to remove them and make slightly different routes. But right now, what's being said here in the routing file is that we're setting up the routes for the Rails application. So the routes all come between this do and this end. The first word here is what HTTP verb is going to trigger the route. And so it's a GET request. And so a GET request to /houses/index will, by convention, open the houses controller's index action. And a GET request to /houses/show will open up the show. Those are not actually the routes that I want, but we can see them at least working at this point. So if I go over here and I go to /houses/index, we'll see the HTML that was in this file here. So it should say inside of an H1 houses index, find me in, etc., etc. There it is, houses index, find me in. And if I go to /show, it goes like that. So that gives me confidence that the routing system is working as expected, but those aren't the routes that we actually want. I want, from my plans, the root route to go to the houses index action, and this route with a placeholder to go to the show action. So I'm going to take those and just put them into the document here as comments. And then I will implement them So this one here, it's a special route. It's the root route. So I'm going to say the root route goes to the houses controller's index action. And we just passed a string, and the way the string works is everything before the hash mark is the controller, and everything after the hash mark is the index. So slightly different from when we saw like houses slash index, like when those routes were initially generated. That's a different convention. We're going here with the convention of using to, passing it a string, and then formatting controller by action here. And then this one here, we're going to say a get request to houses slash ID is going to go to, it's going to go to the houses controller's show action. And I need that to be an actual placeholder. So when Rails sees in this initial string something that begins with a colon, it thinks of it as a placeholder. So if I go to slash houses slash anything at all, then it's going to go to the houses controller show action. If I go to the root, it should go to that index page. So we know that the index page says houses index, that the show page says houses show, so we can again test these routes out. So I'm going to go to the root and test out this root route. That's over here. That's what used to be that welcome to Rails message. It's now correctly the index page. And if I go to slash houses slash some number, it doesn't matter what number, any number at all, I'm going to go to the show page. If I go to a route that doesn't exist, like so if I typo houses and I put an H there, I get a routing error, and at least in development mode, it shows me all of the routes that are actually available. And so it's saying, okay, here you have a route path, it's a get request, this is the one that we've determined, here's the other one. So you get to sort of debug your routing. If you use an incorrect route, it'll show you at the top the routes that you've defined. And then there's always a bunch of routes that Rails defines itself that have to do with mail and file storage. Anytime you get an error in Rails, it sort of looks like this. These errors only come up in this format in development mode. You would never get an error message like this on a production app because it leaks too much information. And the other thing you get when you get an error message is this little black box down here is actually like a little window into your application. You can type Ruby code in here and it just executes. So it sends that Ruby code to your server, runs it, sends it back. So it's like your Rails console, right? I can put math in there. I can say 4.times puts chunky bacon in there. I guess it doesn't do put statements. That's interesting. It just evaluated to the number. But I can also go to my models, right? I can go to like student.count, tells me how many students I have, student.first. And so sometimes that's handy for debugging purposes as well. My route is constrained such that this needs to be plural. House slash anything loads up show, and I mean anything at all. So I could just put in like some key mashing there, and that'll also go to houses slash show. I could even, if I wanted to, add extra constraints there. I could say, well, not only do I want the placeholder to be ID, but I really want that ID to be only a digit. And so I can put in a regular expression here. And in Rails, anything you put between two forward slashes is a regex match. And so /d means numeral, so number, any number, and then plus, one or more numbers. And so now, if I go back over here, /houses /some key mashing no longer does anything. I get a routing error. In production mode, it would put up a 404. But if I do put a number in there, like the number 1 or the number 100, it properly goes to my route. So the routes are now correctly wired up. The actions aren't doing anything yet. So we're gonna do the right thing. In the index action, we wanna load up all the houses so that they can be shown over here. And then in the show action, we wanna load up the house by ID so that it can be shown in the view. So I will go to the houses controller and I will do just that. I will say the index action, I wanna load up all of the houses. I want to go to the house model and get them all. After every action runs, Rails automatically loads the associated view, which in our case is the app views houses index.html.erb. So it's just the view that has the same name as the action. And all like instance bars are shared with the view. So this is where Rails sort of breaks object-oriented encapsulation. Normally our instance variables are private to a class in Ruby, and Rails does some magic to share them automatically with the view. Which means I can go over to this view now, delete the contents like this, and put in some logic here. So I could put in a bit of an if statement that I could say like house, or like if houses dot empty. So if there's an empty collection here, do one thing. Otherwise, do another thing. So if it's empty, we could say there are no houses available. Otherwise, I might want to loop over all of the houses. So I might say something like at houses.each. So for each house, temporarily call them house. And within our loop, maybe we'll put an H2 down and we will echo out. So this is the percent equals for echoing the house name. So this should be reminiscent of PHP, right? Other than the fact that instead of question marks, we have percentage signs. But it's the same kind of stuff that we do in PHP templates, where it's a mixture of if statements and loops that are sort of looping or ifing over bits of HTML, and we're also echoing out content as well. So you only have the less than percent equal sign when you're actually echoing something. I'll show you in a bit what happens if you accidentally put an equal sign in where you don't want one. But let's go take a look at this in the actual application. So I'll go over here. No, not that. We'll go over here. And there are my 5 houses. And here's what would happen if I did accidentally put an equal sign, say for example here on the each statement. It echoes out what that each statement evaluates to, which is the collection itself. So if you ever see your collection sort of coming out in raw format like that, it just means that you've accidentally put an equal sign into your template. To trigger this path, I could go to my Rails console and just destroy all houses. Oh, I got to do both the students and the houses. and it's nice and it tells me there are no houses available. And then when I want that data back, well, I just need to run my seed script again. Which is the handy part about having a seed script, right? It just pre-populates that database for us. Okay, so I got to get rid of that extra equal sign. So I go back over here. And maybe I want to put out a little bit more information about each house. So I could say something like, inside of a paragraph tag, I could say, the students of this house have accumulated, let me just space this out a bit better. Accumulated n points, where I'm going to actually just say how many points there are. I might also say something like there are n students in this house. And then I might also have something like learn more about house, and then house.name, where I actually want this thing to be a link eventually. Or maybe all of this would be a link. It would say like House Gryffindor, and that whole thing would be a link. So right now, without any of those n's in place, I can still go over here and I can test it out. So there are n students in this house. Students in this house have accumulated n points. Learn more about House Gryffindor. That all looks good. I can now fill this in. So because I'm working with Active Record, I can just go to the house here and get the student count. That's handy. Because HTML doesn't care about extra white space, I can just break this to make it a little bit more readable. It won't actually do a new line, right? We only get new lines in HTML on a block level elements. So I can just break the sentence in half and it'll remain like a regular sentence. And then the students of this house have accumulated n points. Well, that's directly on the house object. And I won't make the link yet. Let's go look at this. Oh, I've typoed something. So this is nice. When you make an error message or when you make an error in Rails, it's going to tell you exactly what it is. It says undefined method student. Did you mean students? That is what I meant. And it shows me the line on which I made that error. So I can go and fix that up, which is putting an S there. That's all well and good. There are 15 students in this house. There are 10 students in this house. We've accumulated n number of points. Handy. All of that is nice and good. Do you need to see any of my code specifically, or is there anything that's like working in mine that's not working in your example right now? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted from this index page, although I did mention I want these things, these parts of the output, to be links, but there's not anything to link to yet, so I want those to be the links for the show pages for these individual houses. So now I have to implement that show page. The route for the show has the placeholder ID in it. I can get access to that ID within my controller. When I want to load up an individual house with Active Record, I just need to go find and I can pass it some number. But I don't just want house number 3 always. I want house number, whatever ID is in the URL. And the URL placeholders all end up in the same place. They end up in a special hash called params. And so if you think back to PHP, we had like the get superglobal and the post superglobal, and everything ended up there. Params is like both in one. Our post data goes in there, our get data goes in there. So I can go to params at position ID. If I called the placeholder something different, I would put whatever that different thing is here. And this will load up that single thing. And to make it a little bit more clear, what's triggering each of these actions, just above them, I'll say like a get request to slash is triggering this one, and a get request to slash houses slash ID is triggering that one. And then you can see like there's the relationship. And that's all I need to do in show action. I find the house in question. If the user provides a ID that's not actually in the database, that's going to trigger an exception, which in development mode would show me an error, and in production mode it'll just be a 404, which is fine. Like that, you know, if the house in question is not in the database, displaying a 404 is the appropriate thing to do. And then over here in the show, I can now make use of this at house, because just like above, I can copy these 3 lines here. What's going to happen is Rails is going to automatically open up the associated view. In this case, it's the show view, and then all the instance variables are shared with the view. In our case, that's this at house. So I can just say the at house the variable is shared with the view. In this case, the at houses variable is shared with the view. So there's going to be a little bit of duplication, maybe across what's being displayed here and over in the show page. And we'll look at how to remove that duplication later on. For now, I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to say H2 is going to display the at house name. And then I might take these 2 p tags and just like copy those directly. And so I'm going to copy everything from there to there. Going to reformat it slightly. And over here, this stuff was happening inside of a loop, so I had a house variable. Here, I have an at house variable, so I have to just change that up a little bit. And in addition to displaying this information, I'm also going to display a list of all the students in the house. So I might say like H3 students in house at house.name. And I can do something similar to what we did with the houses, where I could first check to see if there are no students in the house. I could say if house.students is empty, otherwise do something. Say there are no students in this house. Whereas if I do have students, well, then I'll do like an unordered list where I go to the house students collection and loop over each one. And so here, I'm going to loop over all of the students in this house, assigning each one temporarily to a student variable. And then because I'm inside of an unordered list, I want each one of these to be a list item. So inside of an li, I will say at student.name. And that's enough to give me a nice show page. The show page will display the name of the house up top, how many students are in there, how many points they've accumulated, and then if there are students, a list of them, and if there are no students, just a little message. So I need to know quickly an actual primary key for one of the houses. So I'll go over here and say like house.last. I can see Ravenclaw is house 21. So that means I should be able to go to /houses/21. And there we are. There's Ravenclaw, 14 students. The students of this house have accumulated this many points. There they are. If I go to my, I'm in my console, at my console here, if I load up Ravenclaw, and I go to ravenclaw.students.destroy all, and I go to ravenclaw.points and I zero that out, and then save that, I should be able to go back over here, and this should be 0 because I deleted all the students. This should be 0 because I zeroed out the points, and I should see my little message saying there are no students in this house. You definitely can. So the view code is right here. Yeah, that's the if else statement doing that work. And then if I go over here and I load up a different house, like house 20, it'll still have students in it. There they are. So I now have a show for each of the houses, which means I should be able to make a nice little link here. If I go to a route that doesn't exist, it'll pull up my page here. Some routes have names. You can see over here, route path has a name of route path, but this one here, which is my show page, it doesn't currently have a name, and I want to give it a name so I can use it within my views, so that will allow me from the index page to make this into a link. So I'm going to go to that routing, and I'm going to say this link should be known as house, which actually means it'll be known as house path. So I just put comma as house there. That gives a name to this route. And so then here, if I reload this non-existent route, we can see now we've got a name there for that route. It's the house path. So that was defined here. I can now make use of that house path inside of this view, and it will allow me to link from the index page over to the show page for any of, and it'll build, it's going to automatically build my link for me. So I'm going to say here, link to, the link text is going to be the house name. And then where does this link point to? Well, I mean, I could just put a string in here and I could put some URL in here. If I just hard code a URL in there, then this is going to make an A with an href, and it's going to assign every single link the same URL. But that's not what I want. I want it to go to the house path. And by convention, I can just pass it an object of type house, and it'll know to go to the house path. And so I can say link to, using the name of the house, this house object, and Rails will go to the routing system and be like, I have a house, is there a house path? And yeah, there is, because we gave one a name of house. And so if I go back over here, I load up that index, I've now got a link on each one of these. I should be able to click on Gryffindor here, and it goes to the right place, houses/17. And so if I view source on this, you'll see that where I have asked for a link to in the view, what's sent to the browser is an actual link with the correct path filled in. So house 19, house 20, house 21, all that's probably filled in. So there's many cases where instead of manually building some of our HTML in our views, we use little helpers to build it for us, and then those helpers can then use things like the routing system to fill the right things in. And that also can be handy, like suddenly, if we wanted the route to have a slightly different name, we wanted to sort of break conventions and call this something slightly different, you would only have to change it here, and all the views would just automatically update. So that's good. That's earlier I did say I wanted to say like the whole link text to be house Thunderbird. So like the word house would be part of the link. I can make that happen here by just passing a string here and just using plain old like Ruby interpolation to get the word house and then the house name into that string. And so now the link text will be a little bit longer, but they're still always linking to each individual house. There, learn more about House Thunderbird, House Wampus, etc., clickety-clack. Currently, there's no way to get back to the root other than hitting the back button. So it'd be nice maybe if there was like a, go back or a home link on this page. If we remember, if I put in a non-existent route, I can see that the name of that index route is root path. And so over here on the show page, the very bottom here, I could say link to home, and that link to should go to the root path. So sometimes I'm leaning on conventions. So in this case, I just passed an object of type house, and that object of type house has an ID inside of it. And so the routing system looked for a route named house that needed an ID, and it just builds the link for me. In other cases, I just go to the full name of the thing itself, root_path, and that's just going to always go to the same place. It doesn't have any placeholders that need to be filled in. So it doesn't need an object here, it just needs the path itself. And I need an equal sign here, otherwise it's not going to link it. So if you ever accidentally forget that equal sign, what's going to happen is your view is just going to not include what you think it's supposed to include. And so if I go to this house here, it's like, oh, that link is missing. And if we viewed source, we'd see like the p tag is empty. And that's just because I forgot the echo. Put that back in, go over here, reload, and there's home. I mean, there's an argument to be made that this should actually be at the top, and maybe there'd be a menu. It's sort of awkward that the home is at the bottom, right? So we could move that. And maybe there's even an argument that this is part of a menu that should go on every page, right? And so that would be something that could go into my overarching layout. So we could move that from here. I could take these 3 lines here, or 4 of them, and I could move that to the application layout. This is in the app views layouts folder. Where the yield keyword is, that's where each one of our views is going to end up. And so inside of there, maybe I make a header. I put this into the header. I sort of push it over like 3 times. And then here I say Hogwarts, School of, what is it, Wizards and Witches? Wizards and Witches. That should now appear on every page, including a home link. So this we could eventually fill out as a menu. There might be other pages that we start to implement, and that menu could grow over time. But that's stuff that's going to be shared across every part of our application. You know, as also the title, right? So maybe we want the title to be Hogwarts School Web App. If I reload this page, that changes as well. So now I can go to an individual page. I can go back home. I think the only other thing I wanted to demonstrate today was just a little tiny bit of styling. So where we would put some styling here into this application. And so let's say, for example, I wrapped like everything here just in a div with a class of container. I put this down here and I bump all this stuff in a little bit. That'll give me a little bit something to style. You can see up top here in the layout, I've got a tag that's called the style sheet link tag and the JavaScript pack tag. There's specific places where I can put CSS and JavaScript, and they'll automatically just end up in this layout for every page. So before I do that, I might as well do some git committing. So sometimes I want to commit everything. Sometimes I only want to incrementally commit a few things. I'll commit the routes, the show, the index, and the controller. I'll say implemented the houses index and show actions / views. And then I will separately stage the layout. Added the start of a header menu. And maybe a footer as well. Maybe that's handy. I can put a little footer here. And inside of the footer, we just say like, copy wrong 2020. Copy wrong Hogwarts 2020. So that's now appearing on the bottom of every page. And now we can do a little bit of styling. My style sheets all exist in the app assets folder. This is where images, any like image that's just going to be a static image that's displayed on a page, that's also going to be in here. JavaScript, we're going to see later on, goes in just the app JavaScript page or folder. But for now, we're going to go look in this style sheets. There are, close down a few tabs here. There are 2 files in here. One of them was created when I scaffolded or when I generated my house controller. And so this is a place we can put CSS that has to do with houses. And then there's this overarching application CSS. I don't tend to put anything in this file ever. What this file is just there to do is to load up all the other files. There's a little bit of an oddity, but these 2 lines in the comments, that's actually code. So these are like meaningful comments saying that like require tree means like starting in this current folder, recursively find any CSS files that are in this folder and load them up. And then require self is if there were rules in this file, those would also be included. So I'm not going to put any CSS in here. I'm going to put it into the houses. And then if you look at this file extension, it's not a .css. This is a .scss, which is sass, which is a nice sort of addition to CSS. And Rails just includes sass support by default. You can just write sass in here, and the Rails server will just automatically compile it to CSS for delivery to the browser. So if you don't know about sass, we can go to like sasslang.com. and we can learn about syntactically awesome style sheets and all the things that they support. So they give you things like variables and mix-ins that are like functions, all sorts of handy things. And so I can do a little bit of styling here. And I can also just use plain old CSS as well. So I could say like, well, like the body of like this entire document will have a background color of like some kind of gray. And if I go back to my web app, it does. And then I could say, well, but also that container that's sitting inside my body, that should have some kind of, I'll just make it a fixed width. We're not building a responsive website here. We're just some kind of fixed width with a margin of 0 auto and maybe a border, 1 pixel black border. Let me see what that looks like. Didn't see my border. A pixel solid black, is that what I have to type? Yeah. Still not super pretty yet. Maybe I give it a background color of white. And maybe give it a little bit of padding of like 1 EM or 2 EMs. And that's enough just to show off that we can do some styling here, right? So later on, we might style this menu nicely. We might add an image up beside the name of the school. I guess I could also just maybe format that footer a little bit nicer. I could go and find the footer and give it like a top margin of 2 EM and maybe take the font size and dial it down slightly and give it like a slightly different color, like 555. So there's our little message in our footer. And that look and feel will follow us around the website. And that's all I wanted to accomplish for today. So based on our initial plans, we've done all the things. We've created last time our house model. We've created our student model that references the house with a foreign key. We created a controller with 2 actions. One of them is a collection action that deals with the collection as a whole, all of the houses. One of them is a member action, meaning it has a reference to a particular primary key, loading up a particular house. I made some routes for both of those actions. I made some views for both of those actions. I'll show you one more thing with the routes. You can have multiple routes that load to the same or that end up at the same place. Sometimes that can be handy. Sometimes Google will punish you for having multiple endpoints that lead to the same content, and you might have to mark one as canonical with some metadata. But let's just quickly look at that. I could, if I wanted to, also make it so that a GET request to /houses goes to the houses index action. So now like both of these routes are going to the same place. The root route goes to the houses index action and /houses goes to the houses index action. And so if I go back over here, there's the root route is still working, but I can also go to /houses and it does the same thing. The very, very last thing that I can show you is that all of this, these lines here, can actually be coded for us because there is a convention that Rails relies on for its URLs called Restful or REST. That stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's just sort of a standard for how you link to resources on a website. So instead of having all of this here, I can just tell Rails to make those routes for me. And so I can just say, I want some resource routes. So I'll say resources, it's resources for houses, but right now I only need the default index and show routes. The index one, that's going to make me my /houses route. The show one's going to make me my /houses/ID. So this is going to give me the equivalent of a GET request to /houses, which is going to the houses index action, and it's going to give me the equivalent of a GET request to /houses/SOMEID going to the houses controllers show action. So like that. And with this resources, it can also make us like the full suite of what are the 7 RESTful routes. So 2 routes for creating new things, a new and a create, 2 routes for updating things, an edit and an update, and 1 route for destroying things. The edit and destroy are the member routes. Everything else is a collection route. And so going back over here, my app should still work as expected. I can still go home. I can still go to /houses. I can still go to /houses/SOMEID. And so even though I initially manually built those out, it's handy to know that you don't actually have to do that. And you can just rely on the RESTful standard, and resources will build routes for you. And that's all I got for you for today. Does anyone have any last minute questions or comments on anything that we developed today or last class? Good. Then we are done for the day. So thank you very much for coming to class today and listening to me talk about routes and views and controllers and link tos and all those good things.